December 7th, 1941, 7:55 a.m. I'm standing on the lip of Battleship Row when the first torpedo slaps the harbor and the water buckles like metal. This is the story of a single morning designed to freeze an entire ocean. One admiral's one-morning gamble to stop the Pacific Fleet in place so his country could redraw the map before we could move. 6 carriers sprinted through winter seas to make this hour happen. Now, 183 aircraft arrow in. The goal is simple and brutal: cripple the ships, paralyze the yard lock, the harbor into silence long enough for the southward invasions to run wild. I watch the torpedo's wooden fin shear away as it knifes into the shallows, an impossible shot 6 months ago perfected in secret tubs and hangars. The fish runs true. On my left, West Virginia lurches air, turning to teeth inside her hull. Ahead, Arizona takes a bomb through her back, and a cathedral of flame lifts off the water. Men dive, men pull men, curse at valves that refuse to learn a new language under fire. Above it all, a voice in my head repeats the plan's plainest sentence: freeze them in place. Stop their motion. Make time itself hold. Nagumo's first wave skates over the oil farms and dry docks because the brief says ships first, and the brief has the authority of doctrine and the momentum of success. Dive bombers fall on Ford Island like iron rain. Torpedo wakes braid the harbor into white scars. Nevada claws for the channel, daring the sky to pick her out. I taste hot metal as she staggers under a second hit and is shoved ashore to keep the channel clear. For a few long minutes, the gamble looks perfect: battleships gasping in their berths, airfields burning our guns, late to their own argument. If freezing a fleet is possible, this is how it begins. I count seconds the way a medic counts breaths. 8:02, and the harbor becomes a metronome. The double thud of torpedoes, the jackhammer clatter of 25s and 40s, waking up the long organ note of sirens calling men to stations they reach by instinct. A sound-powered phone crackles on a bridge. All hands, general quarters. General quarters. This is not a drill. In a turret, a loader's gloved knuckles split against a brass case and leave a neat crescent of blood that nobody notices because the barrel is still cold and shamefully quiet. A boatswain's pipe squeals and cuts off mid-breath when the deck heaves and slaps his courage into the scuppers. We are inside a machine, learning to scream. Oklahoma rolls away. A tired man rolls in bed to reach for a glass of water and finds the floor instead. I watch rivets pop along her flank like a zipper in reverse. The list turns from attitude to fate. Men claw at ladders that have become walls. Air trapped below finds a fist and pounds at the underside of the sea. A launch veers in crew, reaching for hands that keep vanishing in oil. The water itself hardens with heat and sleet of shrapnel until it feels like walking through a foundry. Cut her lines, someone howls because the ship beside her can't be allowed to be taught the same lesson. A cleat screams and parts. Gravity cruel tutor takes over. On Nevada's bridge, a quartermaster denies the day its script. Ahead, 1/3, he says, voice steady, with an insolence only duty can purchase. The big ship answers, slow, stubborn, magnificent. The channel is a throat, and she tries to run it. She gathers eyes the way a bull gathers red. Bombs reach for her. She keeps moving because motion is now a moral act. A tug, Hoga, shoves at her hip like a friend shouldering you out of a fight you can't win. A second blossom of water smashes her and she staggers, then noses toward shoal to spare the channel. It looks like defeat and behaves like strategy. A destroyer, Monahan, swings wide to chase a periscope that looks like a rumor made of metal. She drops depth charges early, the blasts lifting a sheet of harbor and slapping it down so hard A row of men on a barge lose their footing in the same instant and fall like dominoes. The concussion rattles the teeth in my skull. Somewhere out in the murk, a two-man submarine learns that surprise can drown faster than any man. I climb into a valve in my mind and feel the stick shiver under my hand as I roll into the attack. The dive siren wails that particular note, half banshee, half trumpet, and the island balloons in the sight glass until the target fills the square, and the square feels like destiny. I pin my elbows count 1,000, 1,000, 2, 1,003, then punch the release. G pulls my face into a mask I don't own. The bomb tumbles, finds a deck that was never designed for prayers from above, and teaches steel an unwanted hymn. I haul back level taste copper. A tracer reaches for me and misses by a sentence. At Wheeler, two fighters claw into the air with their teeth. Cockpits still buckled into disbelief, tires barely convinced of sky. I catch a glimpse of one banking sunlight flashing off wing root the pilot's jaw, set in a way I recognize from photographs of men making promises to themselves. A zero cuts across him like a red pencil through a line. He slips, recovers, rolls alive for another minute in a morning that isn't interested in minutes. Back over the harbor, tracers woven up like frantic needlework meet the falling shapes and tell them the conversation has changed. The oil takes fire. It slicks outward in a kaleidoscope that beauty has no right to show its face inside. Men swim through it, coffin black eyes rimed like old glass. A whaleboat skims the margin of flame oars, feathered to keep from biting into fire. On the Arizona's broken back, a sailor runs 3 paces into air that isn't there and lands in the kind of heat that can erase a name. In the sick chemistry of the morning courage and accident, keep swapping tags. In a casemate on West Virginia, a messman with grease on his hands, Miller finds a 50, whose owner is not coming back, and discovers that hands learn faster than prejudice. He leans into the butterfly triggers and rides the recoil like a man being dragged by a stubborn horse. The gun talks long enough to be remembered, short enough to be credible. He doesn't see the citation coming, only the next magazine, the next silhouette, the next second that demands proof he's alive. A signalman on Ford Island runs a halyard like he's ringing a bell for a wedding. Nobody scheduled battle stations and flags that flap against smoke like stubborn birds. The telephone exchange spits static and surrender. Runners with messages in their fists become arteries, and the base learns to circulate without its heart. On the pier, a chief with a voice that could sand wood yells men into teams that didn't exist 5 breaths earlier. They form, fail, reform. The choreography invents itself, haul, cover, pass, duck, breathe. Repeat until there is nothing left to save or saving has become a habit. I step inside a pump room where water insists on making its own introductions. A machinist mate, face lit by a single filthy bulb, rides a wrench like a lever on a slot machine. The nuts are frozen, but his patience isn't. He swears once softly as a prayer. The pump coughs, then takes a breath that becomes a life. Somewhere above a compartment's waterline lowers by the width of a hand, invisible to all but one man, who will feel the deck lighten and think for a second it was his imagination. The second wave announces itself with a new grammar, dauntless purpose from the sky, angrier strafing bombs that hunt hangars already burning because ruin demands witnesses. I drag my eyes toward the tank farm again and feel the same rage that strategy always grants in retrospect. The white cylinders gleam like teeth in a smile the enemy thinks is victory. One aircraft lines up, and for half a breath I beg the pilot in a language he does not speak. He rolls away, obedient to a brief that has confused target with objective. Ford Island's ramp becomes a factory floor. Men who 10 minutes ago were sailors and clerks are now stretcher bearers and judges over small triage empires. Oil-black water drips from cuffs and turns their boots into sodden anvils. Someone starts a hymn by accident, a line hummed low to keep his hands honest, and for 8 bars the air decides not to notice. Then a siren corrects it. A chaplain kneels beside a man whose dog tags belong to a boy who wanted Idaho to last forever. He doesn't pray loudly. He lends the man his breath. A Zero buzzes so low the paint on its belly flashes like a fish. Bullets skitter along a pier and stitch the edge of a canvas awning into lace. A seaplane tender answers with everything that will cycle. The gun captain, lips flecked with soot, slaps the shield twice, one to wake the gun, one to wake himself. The round goes, the next round goes, and in the stuttering arithmetic of tracers, a pilot decides to pick a different moment to be brave. I watch a bomb fall toward a dry dock and feel the arithmetic running in 2 heads, at once the one who released it, believing the big iron tub is a worthy target, and the one in the dock who knows the value of an emptiness that can turn wreck into ready. The bomb smashes the lip throws concrete like dice, and still the dock holds water the way a stern parent holds a child tight enough to teach, not so tight as to break. Men in rubber boots stare at the crack and see not catastrophe but a job. On a pier, a petty officer discovers his own invention. 2 fire hoses lashed and arced so they can sweep flame off a slick by playing it like a serpent. He grins once, feral, not because it's clever, but because it works. A boatswain's mate, burned along one forearm, grinds his teeth, tucks his sleeve down, and keeps the pattern going. Behind them, a line forms of men passing 5-gallon cans of foam concentrate hand to hand a chain as old as ships. The air over the harbor is now crowded with opinions. Friendly flak bursts in anxious flowers. A curtain of smoke hangs at mast height and moves as if the base itself had decided to breathe. Through it, every now and then, a sunshaft lays a golden plank across wreckage and tricks your heart into calling it beautiful. I refuse the trick, then fail, then refuse again. The camera in my head refuses nothing. It sees and records. It will punish me later when the room is quiet and this morning grows loud all over again. But the camera won't let me lie by omission. The carriers, the real bone of our reach, are out at sea, and the white tanks of fuel beyond the battleships stand unlit, fat with tomorrow. The dry docks hold. The machine of repair cranes pumps yardmen who think in bolts per minute, still has a pulse. Above me, a dive bomber pulls off target to rejoin, and a thought cuts clean through the smoke. You can shatter ships. But if you leave oil and tools, motion comes back. I track an HE down the glide. The pilot's sight picture is perfect. The harbor's geometry is cruel. He breaks climbs, banks over a city that doesn't yet know its name will be a date. On Akagi, Commander Fuchida will key the words that crown the plan, Tora, 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 complete surprise. And still, the Admiral's wager requires one more turn of the screw. A third wave to torch the tanks to smash the docks to make this pause into paralysis. He hesitates. The strike commander counts losses. The carriers turn north. The window that could have turned a morning into a season closes with the ordinary click of caution. On the pier, a messman with grease on his hands shoulders a gun he wasn't trained to fire and learns the weapon by feel. In the yard, a diver checks his air and drops into milked-out water as if entering a library where the books scream. On my notepad, the thesis is already written. One admiral tried to stop time. For 2 hours, he nearly did. Then the oil that didn't burn the docks, that didn't break, and the men who refused to be statues began the slow, stubborn work of unfreezing an ocean. I carry that opening in my body like a bruise as I step back into the room where the story began, a wardroom on a flagship that smelled of lacquer and engine heat maps stacked like arguments. Asoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief, Combined Fleet, keeps one finger pressed on a straight edge and the other on a teacup that has gone cold while his mind runs hot. He has gambler's eyes alert, unsentimental, secretly haunted by the arithmetic he can't charm. Around him, young men with pilot's shoulders and engineer's wrists repeat the litany: surprise, concentration, speed. They have solved 100 small problems for this one morning, because a morning like this is built from chores. Shallow water torpedoes that should nosedive in a harbor. Give them wooden tail fins that will peel away at the right second. Armor-piercing shells meant to lance battleships at sea. Bore them, fuse them, turn them into bombs that drop through decks and become gravity's confederates. Radio silence heavy enough to feel with your teeth. Practice it until your own heartbeat sounds like a leak. In the North Pacific, the carriers practice disappearing. Kido Butai slides under weather that erases edges, the kind of gray that persuades men they were born for patience. On Akagi, a petty officer oils the wire on a torpedo's safety catch with the attentiveness of a man polishing a story he intends to tell exactly once. On Kaga, a rigger checks the same knot twice because he knows no one will remember his name if he gets it right, and everyone will if he gets it wrong. Pilots sew good luck flags with prayers written in hands steadier than the hearts that signed them. Someone stubs a cigarette out on wind that can't be seen. The ships cross an ocean with no music except screws and the way steel talks to itself in the cold. Across that same ocean, a harbor goes to sleep careless because care looks too much like pessimism on a Sunday. In a radar shack at Opana, 2 operators watch a ghost fatten on the scope. They are told, gently and incorrectly, to expect B-17s. Admiral Husband Kimmel rubs a tired spot near his glasses and believes he has time to become a footnote on some later page, not this one. Sailors trim eggs they won't have time to eat. A chief scolds a rope because scolding keeps the world at human scale. A clarinet leans against a bulkhead and learns a new silence it will never unlearn. And then the morning behaves as promised. Torpedoes enter the harbor with a strange grace, a choreography that was born in test tanks far away. They strike low and mean turning compartments into clenched fists. Level bombers lumber in with bellies full of made-over armor shells and drop their arguments through decks that were told to fear shell fire from a distance, not hammers from the sky. Dive bombers write vertical cursive over Ford Island's airfields. The harbor's surface becomes the map's truth, wakes flames, slicks. On West Virginia, water shoves its way into a life it wasn't invited to. Tennessee holds steady because geometry is a kind of luck. Arizona, no euphemisms, detonates, and the film inside my head yanks the color out so we can bear to watch. The plan's beauty, if I'm allowed that treasonous word, resides in its timing. 6 decks in one breath, 80 minutes carved into 2 blows. The goal is not annihilation, it's paralysis. Freeze the fleet. Buy 6 months of freedom of action to run south. Seize oil and rubber, fortify a perimeter that looks impregnable on a map furnished by Wish and Fuel. It is a mechanic's conception of history. Stop this machine so the other machine can run. And for those first minutes, the mechanic looks like a poet. But the map on Yamamoto's table, back in the wardroom, had a margin note written in blue pencil by a man who saw farther than his rank allowed one morning gamble. Not a slogan, a warning. One morning can interrupt motion. It cannot abolish it, not if you leave the arteries intact. On the far side of the harbor, the white cylinders of oil sit like obese saints, untroubled by flame. The dry docks, those awkward iron bathtubs where ships are born again, are bruised, not broken. The carriers, the real reach of an ocean, are out at sea acquiring myth by accident. The gamble has a half-life, and it is shorter than pride allows. I climb in my mind into a cockpit on the first wave and watch the pilot's hand move over the sight. His brief says ships and airfields. The tanks beyond the waterline are visually loud but doctrinally quiet. He breaks for the next designated target because discipline is a language his body speaks without asking permission. On deck, Vice Admiral Nagumo weighs loss against risk with a caution that sounds responsible in the room and disastrous in the long retelling. A third strike could set the harbor's muscles on fire. It could also invite the American carriers wherever they are to arrive at the worst possible moment. He chooses to leave. History gives his decision the pained courtesy reserved for men who almost talk themselves into both outcomes and pick the less dangerous in a dangerous enterprise. What remains behind moves. Nevada, punched and brave, tries for the open sea and gets slapped back against the shore so the channel stays open. Dorie Miller messman, work listed, nowhere near a gun station, grabs a weapon and an argument, and decides that training is a luxury when the house is on fire. Fire crews write their own geography in water and foam. Divers arrive with coffee breath inside their masks, drop into a harbor that has turned to milk, and learn the new acoustics of a city underwater. The fizz of trapped air leaving a compartment, the complaint of a plate under stress. The obscene calm of a ship settling into a posture it never rehearsed. And then the hour shifts. Planes land back on Akagi, and her sister's tires kissing deck with practiced insolence. The flight deck smells of hot oil and victory translated into data sorties, losses, guesses about damage. Commander Fuchida signals the phrase that will live longer than any of them complete surprise. Yamamoto, inland of the spray, feels the numb satisfaction of seeing the machine he designed run as advertised, and the quick, unwelcome tickle of realizing which levers weren't pulled. Run wild for 6 months. He says later, after that, no confidence. I don't need to quote him. The sentence exists in the air the way a barometer's fall predicts a storm you can feel in your shoulder. Southward, the plan begins to collect its receipts. Malaya, Hong Kong, the Indies. The map fills with flags the color of ambition, feints, and thrusts performed by men who have studied logistics until it behaves like destiny. In Manila, courage meets a schedule it can't change. In Singapore, a myth steps backward in shock. For a season, Yamamoto's morning looks like it purchased precisely what the cashier rang up Freedom to take what the home islands need in order to stand taller than their shadow. But, back at Pearl, the work of thaw begins immediately, and without romance. Yardmen, scarred practical men who believe in torque, more than oaths hang chalkboards that say simply, "What is left?" The list starts short and grows long. Pumps arrive like verbs. Cranes teach their cables to be priests for hulls that require laying on of hands. The dry docks fill with casualties and exhale ships in the company of welders, divers, pipe fitters who measure progress by how quickly their clothes turn black at the seams. A welder writes his wife that the air tastes like burned sugar. He means the paint. A clerk writes the names of the dead with a nib that must not blot. A band plays a hymn and then volunteers to haul hose because everyone plays more than one instrument now. Photographs learn to tell the truth. In a dry dock, Tennessee's armor looks like the conscience of iron. On a yard wall, someone pins a print of a seam, so fine you'd miss it if the arrow and caption didn't say, "We started here." Nevada goes back to sea. West Virginia, drowned, humiliated, learns to breathe again with new lungs and an old spine. The fuel in the big white tanks feeds the revival, the very oil that a third wave could have sent into a black river through the streets becomes the bloodstream for recovery. The carriers that weren't home breed like ideas. The fleet that was supposed to become a photograph puts on weight, then muscle, then purpose. I walk between rooms in time. In one, salvage divers teach recruits the new catechism: listen for bubbles and move faster than your doubts. In another, on Yamamoto's flagship, a staff meeting turns respectful fear into a plan. Midway, 2 syllables like a hinge. If one morning can freeze a fleet long enough to build offensive conquests, perhaps another morning can force your adversary to accept the fence. He turns maps into equations and writes answers on people. He'd rather play out the next hand than fold. He knows the odds and gambles anyway because gamblers don't quit when the deck seems unfriendly. They change games. I climb into that week in June. Cloud hangs like a curtain you don't trust. Scout planes multiply into rumor. A young man with salt in his blood and stubbornness in his hands sees what he shouldn't yet see, a glint that is more geometry than ocean, and says it into a radio, with a certainty that makes him older in a single sentence. Dive bombers arrive over carriers laden with ordnance and assumptions. Deck crews run with the wrong kind of speed. A kaga soar you, then soon hear you names that used to feel like permanence become smoke and swimming steel. The morning that once belonged entirely to Yamamoto is paying compound interest to someone else. Back in Pearl, the band practices again. They will play all the way to Tokyo Bay in 3.5 years, because the gamble's wound healed into a scar that could flex because the tanks that didn't burn kept the yard alive long enough to grow teeth because a harbor that was supposed to be a still life refused to stop moving. I read a 1943 line that refuses drama repaired and returned to service. Each time the sentence is written, it rewrites December's thesis without asking permission. I chase the wager through the lives it touched in ways that won't fit on a staff map. A mess man who discovered he could coach a .50 caliber with his shoulder and later coached Little League with the same patience. A Tokyo seamstress who hemmed a pilot's flag and then a widow's black dress from the same roll of silk. A diver who couldn't listen to soda fizz without thinking of air leaving a compartment where he was too late. A ferry pilot who learned to carry 2 handkerchiefs forever because grief likes a spare. We pack a morning with too much meaning and then spend years unpacking it into gestures the world can live with. I return finally to the phrase that titled the folder "Blue Pencil Soft with Age." One morning gamble. I roll it on my tongue now the way I rolled it the first time, but it tastes different because I have seen the receipts. The gamble worked paralysis for hours, chaos for days, space for conquests. The gamble failed the wrong targets, spared the wrong lesson, learned the wrong kind of caution chosen at the wrong minute. That is history's favorite shape. Both things true at once, depending on the angle of light. Freezing a fleet turns out not to be a matter of ships alone. It is a matter of stopping the fuel, the tools, the hands, the habits. Leave any of those warm and ice melts. I put the plan on a workbench in my head and take it apart, because machines confess under honest light. I lay the pieces in chalked rows: surprise carrier mass, torpedo innovation, intelligence gaps, doctrine, fuel dry docks, third wave debate, weather luck. Then I add the parts that look like clutter until you know them well: rumor, fatigue, pride, thrift, a pilot's muscle memory, a yardman's refusal to go home at midnight. Reassembled, the plan still runs. Of course it runs. We watched it run. But when you ask it to run longer, when you ask it to convert hours into months, by leaving oil and docks intact, the bearings heat up. The belt squeals. The operator, the one who isn't paid to be a hero, backs the throttle down exactly when the engine needs a little cruelty. The test ends. A note is left for the next shift operable. Short, run only. I remember 2 clocks from the wardroom. One was the neat wall clock of orders and timetables. The other was the hot pulse of engines underfoot. The one morning gamble synchronized them with malevolent grace for a few hours. But clocks drift when you stop watching, and the Americans, wounded furious, set their watches by the yard, whistle the carrier's klaxon, the lilt of a hymn, not by the fear that this harbor would never move again. Motion returned in ungainly, magnificent steps, a pump engaging a keel, rising a propeller, turning in a test pool, a pilot walking to a ready room at dawn, and, because I am condemned to honesty, I end where I began, back on the lip of Battleship Row inside that first 30 seconds where attention is a frayed rope. A torpedo wake is a scar someone else drew across water. The wooden tail floats off like a shed idea. A man's hand closes a valve wheel he's never turned that fast. A ship shudders in a language only steel speaks. An admiral's pencil line on a map becomes a line of smoke in a sky too blue for comfort. A morning tries to become a season. It doesn't. The picture blurs. The harbor moves. The fleet that was supposed to be paralyzed learns a new gait and goes looking not for a photograph to prove it survived, but for the horizon that survival makes possible. That is the whole of it, as clean as I can draw the line and as complicated as the human pieces require. One admiral's one morning gamble tried to freeze the Pacific Fleet in place. For hours, it succeeded brilliantly. For months, its momentum bought a wider war, but the oil that did not burn the docks that did not fall, and the hands that would not accept stillness thawed an ocean the plan meant to stiffen. The morning became a hinge, not a lock, and when time began moving again, it moved with a velocity that would carry those same hands and that same harbor all the way across the Pacific to close a ledger that, on that first terrible morning, looked like it would never balance.